The Knowledge Illusion. Why We Never Think Alone. By Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach. Read for you by Mike Chamberlain. Introduction. Ignorance and the Community of Knowledge. 3 soldiers sat in a bunker surrounded by 3-foot-thick concrete walls, chatting about home. The conversation slowed and then stopped. The cement walls shook, and the ground wobbled like jello. 30,000 feet above them, in a B-36, crew members coughed and sputtered as heat and smoke filled their cabin and dozens of lights and alarms blared. Meanwhile, 80 miles due east, the crew of a Japanese fishing trawler, the not-so-lucky Lucky Dragon No. 5, Daigo Fukuryu Maru, stood on deck, staring with terror and wonder at the horizon. The date was March 1st, 1954, and they were all in a remote part of the Pacific Ocean witnessing the largest explosion in the history of humankind, the detonation of a thermonuclear fusion bomb nicknamed Shrimp, codenamed Castle Bravo. But something was terribly wrong. The military men, sitting in a bunker on Bikini Atoll, close to Ground Zero, had witnessed nuclear detonations before and had expected a shock wave to pass by about 45 seconds after the blast. Instead, the earth shook. That was not supposed to happen. The crew of the B-36, flying a scientific mission to sample the fallout cloud and take radiological measurements, were supposed to be at a safe altitude, yet their plane blistered in the heat. All these people were lucky compared to the crew of the Daigo Fukuryu Maru. 2 hours after the blast, a cloud of fallout blew over the boat and rained radioactive debris on the fishermen for several hours. Almost immediately, the crew exhibited symptoms of acute radiation sickness, bleeding gums, nausea, burns, and one of them died a few days later in a Tokyo hospital. Before the blast, the U.S. Navy had escorted several fishing vessels beyond the danger zone. But the Daigo Fukuryu Maru was already outside the area the Navy considered dangerous. Most distressing of all, a few hours later, the fallout cloud passed over the inhabited atolls Rongelap and Utruk, irradiating the native populations. Those people have never been the same. They were evacuated 3 days later after suffering acute radiation sickness and temporarily moved to another island. They were returned to the atoll 3 years later, but were evacuated again after rates of cancer spiked. The children got the worst of it. They are still waiting to go home. The explanation for all this horror is that the blast force was much larger than expected. The power of nuclear weapons is measured in terms of TNT equivalents. The little boy fission bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945 exploded with a force of 16 kilotons of TNT, enough to completely obliterate much of the city and kill about 100,000 people. The scientists behind Shrimp expected it to have a blast force of about 6 megatons, around 300 times as powerful as Little Boy. But Shrimp exploded with a force of 15 megatons, nearly 1,000 times as powerful as Little Boy. The scientists knew the explosion would be big, but they were off by a factor of about 3. The error was due to a misunderstanding of the properties of one of the major components of the bomb, an element called lithium-7. Before Castle Bravo, lithium-7 was believed to be relatively inert. In fact, lithium-7 reacts strongly when bombarded with neutrons, often decaying into an unstable isotope of hydrogen, which fuses with other hydrogen atoms, giving off more neutrons and releasing a great deal of energy. Compounding the error, the teams in charge of evaluating the wind patterns failed to predict the easterly direction of winds at higher altitudes that pushed the fallout cloud over the inhabited atolls. This story illustrates a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?